Our scripture that I've chosen to be read at this time is found in the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes. That's right after Proverbs, written by the wisest foolish man that ever lived. And it's Ecclesiastes chapter 12. That's the last chapter, and it's the conclusion of the whole matter, the last couple of verses. I'll give you a moment there to find that particular text in your Bible. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, 13 and 14. Now let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. I think King James has it the whole duty of man, something like that. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. At the conclusion of our study this morning, we're going to come right back to this text again. So you want to just kind of keep that in mind and see how our study ends up at its starting point. Excuse me just a second. I spoke here last on the first Sabbath of March. It's 5 months ago. It's the first Sabbath of September today, okay? And I know all of you remember distinctly what I spoke upon in all the detailed points of my sermon, right? No? Well, you know, I would expect you would forget some other people's preaching, but I just can't hardly fathom and imagine that you would forget mine. But in case your memory is like mine, really good but really short, I brought my first sermon here with you. This is going to be part 2 today, so I'll have to preach the first one, an hour, and then we'll go into the second. No, I won't do that. But I do want to quickly review with you. I entitled it A Story to Ponder, or A Story Worth Pondering. And the story is found in the book of 2 Kings. If you want to turn there, 2 Kings chapter 5. And chapter 5 records the story of the healing of Captain Naaman, captain of the Syrian army. And of course, the story wouldn't be complete without also the little maid, the unnamed servant girl to the wife of Captain Naaman. She's prominent in the story. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Father in heaven, it's such a privilege to be able to open your word and spend some time in it. It's the living word. It's the word that you spoke and worlds came into existence, and you spoke and it stood fast. And so now we ask that you'll speak again today here in our presence. In Jesus' name we make this request. Amen. So we learned last time that Captain Naaman was a pretty prominent man. In fact, he was a national hero in Syria. Capital of Syria, of course, being Damascus. He was popular with the people. a national hero. He was revered by the soldiers who served under him. He was trusted by the king. And the text says he was blessed by God. Not some foreign God, but blessed by the God. Prominent man, famous man, capable man, well-recognized man. The trouble is, all of that famousness and ability and greatness counted for nothing, because the Bible records he was a leper. That's what we discovered in part 1 of the story. And we had to bring that truth home. You see, we can think we're pretty big stuff. Good looking, famous, dynamic, intellectual, talented, all of the things that you might want to describe, athletic, but all of that counts for nothing in heaven's eyes, because guess what? We are lepers too. Our leprosy is called sin. And sin is a contagious disease like leprosy. It's one that heaven doesn't want in its midst. That's why we are quarantined. We're in a penitentiary. We're doing time because we are sinners. We're quarantined. And so we need healing like Captain Naaman needed healing. And we can't do it ourselves. We took a little time to compare how sin and leprosy, the similarities between the two diseases, sin and leprosy, both were defiling, both disfiguring, both deadening, both disassociating. You lost all contact with society. We've lost all ability to directly communicate and be with the rest of God's universe because of sin, because of leprosy. And leprosy was deadly. Comparisons. Then we focused on the story of Little Maid. And we grappled with the concept of God's providential leading. That's a difficult thing to try to understand at times. Maybe most of the time. He does things, orchestrates things, allows things, and it seems baffling to us. How could this little Hebrew girl, torn from her family like it must have been, be in God's providence? Or how could he allow it? Or why did he allow it? Or did he allow it? And we grappled a little bit with that. And I guess I don't know how well I did with that whole scenario, but what I've concluded is that the providence of God is a mystery that we cannot always explain, and many times we can't. It makes no sense to us. But yet I firmly believe that when the veil is drawn back and we can see as God sees, we would say, I want it no other way. As hard as it might be, as bitter as the pill might be, as difficult or just can't understand the situation, when we see it through God's eyes, we'll say, it is well. I won't want it any other way. We also considered a bit the lack of faith of the king of Israel. I mean, you would think God's people who have his word and his prophets and all the histories of his leading, they would be the ones that had the most faith. But as soon as Captain Naaman shows up at the king's door with a letter from the king of Assyria, what does he do? He rents his clothes. Now, who can heal leprosy? He expects, no, he's not really wanting to be healed from, he just wants to pick a fight. And so we spent a little time considering that dynamic. Then we looked at the actual meeting of Elisha and Naaman. Naaman was a bit offended by that meeting because, you see, Elisha didn't even come to the door. Instead, he sent one of his servants to meet Captain Naaman and said, go wash in the river Jordan 7 times, you'll be healed. The proud Captain Naaman needed his pride humbled a bit. And so, what did he do? He turned on his heels with his big motorcade of soldiers and servants and steeds and chariots, and away they started to leave. Once again, a servant comes to the rescue. And one of his soldiers, one of his servants, addressed him, my father, and reasons with him and humbles his pride. And he went to the river Jordan, and he dipped 7 times, as the prophet said, and he was healed. That's where we left the story the last time that I spoke. And so we want to carry it on from there. If you want to turn to 2 Kings chapter 5, and we'll read it in verse 14. We'll pick up there. I'm going to read the whole presentation. Thank you. Read the whole rest of the story, and then we'll work back from that point of dipping in the river Jordan. All right, verse 14. So he went down and dipped 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all of his aides, and came and stood before him and said, indeed, now I know that there is no God in all of the earth except in Israel. Now, therefore, please take a gift from your servant. And he, that is Elisha, said, as the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive nothing. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. So Naaman said, then if not, please let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth. For your servant will no longer offer either burnt offering or sacrifices to other gods, but to the Lord. Verse 18, yet in this thing may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the temple of Rimmon, that's the temple where the idol Baal Hadad would have been located, the chief god of the Syrians. When he goes there to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow in the temple of Rimmon, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord please pardon your servant in this thing. Then he, that is Elisha, said to him, go in peace. And so he departed from him a short distance. But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, look, my master has spared Naaman this Syrian, while not receiving from his hand what he brought. But as the Lord liveth over my dead body, I will run after him and take something from him. So Gehazi pursued Naaman. And when Naaman saw him running after him, he got down from the chariot to meet him and said, is all well? And he said, all is well. My master has sent me, saying, indeed, just now 2 young men of the sons of the prophets have come to me from the mountains of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments. Talent of silver, 75 pounds. What's that in ounces? 1,400 ounces, 1,200 ounces, something like that. Anyway, a lot of money, $17,000 worth. How would a college student today like a gift of $17,000 for visiting the prophet? Be pretty good, huh? Now Naaman said, please take 2 talents, $35,000. And he urged him and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of garments and handed them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of him, that is, ahead of Gehazi. And when he came to the citadel, he took them from their hand and stored them away in the house, and then he let the men go, and they departed. And now he went in and stood before his master Elisha. And to him, Elisha asked, where did you go, Gehazi? And he said, your servant didn't go anywhere. And then he said to him, did not my heart go with you when the man turned back from his chariot to meet you? Is it time to receive money and to receive clothing, olive groves and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male and female servants? Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. And he went from his presence leprous, as white as snow. Wow. So Captain Naaman dipped in the river Jordan 7 times and was healed, physically healed from the leprosy. But Captain Naaman came out of that water a new man, a different man. Bible calls it born again. In fact, it was Jesus speaking to another famous, prominent person who said the words in John chapter 3, most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of heaven. And so Captain Naaman has a new birth. And the text that we just read illustrates that in maybe about 4 different ways we can see the evidences of the new birth. First of all, he goes back to the prophet. He returns back to the prophet. Now that sounds easy, but for Naaman to have got to the River Jordan to do his dipping, that was a 25-mile trip. And you're traveling about 3 miles an hour. That tells you about how long it's going to take to get back from the River Jordan. So you have Samaria, you have the spot on the River Jordan, and then you have Damascus, where he's headed. He's going to have to go the opposite direction of home to go back to the prophet to say thank you. Okay? So he had to go out of his way, 50 miles basically out of his way to say thank you to the prophet. But that's a reflection of a changed heart. The proud man that went and stood at Elisha's door and didn't even get out of the chariot, stood there expecting Elisha to come to him. That proud man now treks back 25 miles to say thank you. That's the sign of a changed man. Secondly, when he comes back, he makes 2 confessions and 1 very interesting request. His first confession is, indeed, now I know, very emphatic, indeed now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. That's verse 15, the second part. That's his first confession. He says, indeed I know. I mean, for a fact, I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. I can think of Paul, who makes some emphatic statements like, I know in whom I believe, John, these things I have written unto you that believe on the name of the Son of God, that you may know that you have eternal life. Job makes the same kind of emphatic statement. I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I'll see God. The second emphatic statement, along with the most unusual request, is in verse 17. Now Naaman said, then if not, in other words, if you're not going to take the gift from me, please let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth. Now this is the same guy who was having a real problem dipping 7 times in the muddy Jordan River, okay? He could think of more beautiful, cleaner rivers back at Damascus. In fact, he named 2 of them. I'd rather go there and dip than this stinking river here in Israel. The same man who made that is now asking for 2 mule loads of dirt, please. Can I take some dirt back with me? So why has he asked that request? Well, the people in his day, in his culture, believed that each god that a nation served was somehow connected with and to their land, to their territory. So if he's going back to Syria and he wants to worship the God of Israel, he can't do it on Syrian land. He has to do it on the land of Israel. So if he takes some dirt back with him and lays the dirt out and kneels on that dirt, then he's worshiping the God, the true God of Israel, you see. So it was very practical. Please, I need a couple loads of dirt, please. Get the skid steer out and let's get a couple loads of dirt, and I'll take it back with me so that I can worship the God of Israel. And then he goes on to say, for your servant will no longer offer either burnt offerings or sacrifices to other gods, but to the Lord. The third evidence that I see of Naaman's change, his new heart, is his generosity. He comes back and he wants to offer Elisha a gift, an offering. And he brought quite a bit with him, brought a lot of money with him, both gold and silver and designer clothes, tailor-made suits. Surely the prophet would need some of this money for, the schools of the prophets. I've been a treasurer in conference before, and our academies are like black holes. I mean, whew, the money, and it disappears as quick as you can pour it in. It's kind of, sometimes I think maybe 3 ABN's a little like that. But anyway, so surely Elisha could use that money for a lot of good things. But he says no. And the reason he said no is because he did not want Naaman to think that the work of the prophet is all about profit. Okay? I'm not here to do this for money. Money means nothing. In fact, I am richly paid because you're a new man. You're both healed physically of leprosy. And whenever in history has that ever happened? But even more, you're healed internally. The rebellious man who was rebelling against the God of heaven, warring against Israel and the God of heaven, is now a believer. That's my reward. And he also wanted the captain to understand that God's grace is not something you buy. It's a free gift. It's a free gift. God paid the price so that we wouldn't have to pay the price. The fourth evidence of Naaman's conversion is the sensitivity and tenderness of his conscience. And this creates a little dilemma for us today trying to figure out how to handle this. Yet in this thing, may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the temple of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow down in the temple, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord please pardon your servant in this thing. Oh, wow. How would you answer that? Would you say, sure, no problem. God would overlook at that. And then you got thinking, I wonder if that would make him begin thinking that you can compromise. Wasn't it in the Bible that it says you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that's in the heaven above or that's in the earth beneath or that's in the water under the earth, and you shall not bow down to them or serve them? For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. So you want to encourage the captain to disregard that? Kind of difficult. On the other hand, you might think, well, wait a minute, Naaman's a newborn babe in the faith. He probably doesn't have sufficient maturity and trust in God to withstand the consequences of refusing to go in with the king. I mean, the times that Naaman's thinking about this whole deal, it will be probably some national festival when all the big brass are out and the king is part of the whole activity of this grand occasion. He goes into the temple and bows down to the national god or idol. And of course, it's expected that the general of the armies of Syria would go with him. He'd lean on his hand, So how would you answer that? I find it interesting, Elisha's response. Elisha says to him, verse 19, go in peace. So he departed from him a short distance. Go in peace. Elisha's answer isn't affirming him or denying him. It isn't saying yes and it isn't saying no. It just says go in peace. Okay? I guess maybe Elisha probably knew that Naaman wasn't mature enough yet. And to send him away at this point, at this high point. I mean, he's just been healed of leprosy. What a joy. He's just discovered the one true God, the only God in all the earth that can heal someone who's got honest to goodness leprosy. It's like having terminal cancer with only days to live and absolutely hopeless, and you're healed. I mean, who can do that? And so you can just think of the anticipation. His soldiers and the whole retinue that's come with him are excited and ecstatic about this thing. And when they go back home, the whole nation of Syria is going to hear the story. I mean, little Maid's going to be excited. Mrs. Naaman's going to be excited. I mean, he's going back with joy. And to temper that whole event with the dilemma of what do you do about handling going into this service, Elisha just puts it off for God to deal with at a future time. As I've experienced life and had evidence of my own sin, more clearly as the years go by. I don't know about you, but for me, I have concluded to deal very gently and softly with other people in their sin, but deal more sternly and directly with me in my sin. Okay? And I think that's maybe what Elisha is teaching us. We learn that from this story that God's grace is healing and that the growth in grace is progressive, not instantaneous. Okay? Don't know if that's helpful to you or not. I know that there may be some saints among us who've never sinned a day in their life. Maybe won't understand that. But for me in my house, it makes sense to me. The story turns now in quite a marked way. You know, Naaman's been healed. He's come back to say thank you. He's offered his gift. He's taken back his 2 mule loads of dirt, and he's headed home, and now the story turns. And it's the sad and dark side of the story. And the person that comes into view is the servant of Elisha, Gehazi. And one word describes this man, and the word is covetous. This man suffers from the leprosy that you don't see on the outside, but was present on the inside, and that was covetousness. And I just have a few lessons that I'd like for us to catch today about covetousness. First, covetousness blinds one's spiritual perception and undermines one's character, his likeness to God. And Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, "Look, my master has spared Naaman this Syrian." He doesn't view Naaman as someone to win to God. Instead, he views Naaman as an enemy to be destroyed. And somehow his master, Elisha, has spared him, didn't destroy him, and he calls him this Syrian, okay? So he has disdain. His spiritual perceptions are dimmed or blanked out as a result of covetousness. And so he says, I'll run after him and take something from him. It isn't that I'll receive something from him. He says, I'll take something from him. Gehazi had lots of advantages. He was the servant of Elisha, the man of God. He was constantly in the companionship of a godly person. He saw many wonderful miracles performed by Elisha. He sat at the feet of one of the Old Testament's greatest teaching prophets. What an opportunity for light and truth. Gehazi continually witnessed the life of a man greatly dedicated to God, a man of unselfishness. So all of these privileges Gehazi had, yet Gehazi disregarded it all. He paid no attention. He was blind to light, deaf to sound, unfeeling to touch in spiritual matters. His covetous nature caused him to completely disregard his spiritual opportunities. Yet when you contrast him with Naaman's servants had no spiritual advantage. Yet they sympathized with Elisha and had the good of Naaman at their heart. Elisha's servant, Gehazi, had great spiritual advantages, yet he complained about Elisha's actions and was disinterested in the welfare of Naaman. Makes no sense. we would have predicted, or I would have predicted just the opposite. Surely Elisha would be the one who had the servant of character, while heathen Naaman would be plagued with covetous evil servants. However, such was not the case. The servant with all the advantages for good turned out bad, and the servants who had few spiritual advantages turned out good. All this tells us that the greatness of privilege does not necessarily predict the greatness of character. The heart must be receptive and responsive to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, or the spiritual advantages does one no good. A covetous heart blinds one's spiritual perceptions. Today, we have a government-run welfare system. And I can be misunderstood in what I'm about to say, so please listen carefully and understand the intents of what I'm saying. But in the government welfare system, the philosophy is if you could change the environment, in other words, if you could clean up the slum or remove people from the slum, it would solve the problem. But that's not the case. You won't solve the slum problem without first taking the slum out of the people. That's the problem. You know, you can take and put a person, you might say, from the slum and put them in a palace, and sadly, they could turn the palace into a slum. What we need is a heart change. Now, I'm not saying this about everyone who lives in a urban area, in the ghettos of an urban, but I'm saying that we've been long enough as a nation throwing money without saying, wait a minute, there needs to be a heart change. You can't make a person who maybe doesn't want to work, you can't give them a job and make them work, okay? So there's two issues there. The poverty is one issue, but the heart issues is the other and probably the greater issue, is what I'm saying. I hope I haven't offended somebody, but it's something to think about. So here it is, Gehazi had the best of environment, but had a covetous heart and was blind to it all. And the servants of Naaman, who didn't have any of those advantages, had the right heart. And so it makes a difference. Time is running away here. Another example of, or lesson we can learn from Gehazi's covetousness is it has an insatiable appetite. Covetousness makes one have an insatiable, you cannot satisfy the appetite. Now Gehazi pursued Naaman. When Naaman saw him running after him, and he got down from the chariot to meet him and said, "Is all well?" And he said, "All's well. My master has sent me, saying, indeed, just now, two young men," two young men, sons of the prophets, have come to me from the mountains of Ephraim. Could be true. Don't know for sure. Could have had two sons of the prophets come. How he's using this story, though, is suspect. Please give them a talent of silver, and 2 changes of garments. So Naaman said, yeah, please take 2 talents. And he urged him and bound them, in the sacks, and gave him the 2 changes of garments, handed them to his servants so that they could carry them back to Samaria, the capital. It's interesting here, the insatiable appetite of covetousness led Gehazi to deception. And so he has to first deceive Naaman by saying this story, making up a story. And now he's got the booty, the 2 big bags of silver and a change of clothes. And now Naaman has just created a problem for Gehazi. They're headed back home with all this stuff, and Gehazi can't be seen with it. So what's he going to do? And the story says they came to the citadel. The citadel is the Hebrew word for Ophel, which is kind of like a hill. So they came to a hill. Probably on the hill was a guard tower, or maybe even a fortress. Could have been guarded, could have been abandoned, we don't know which. They came to that before they got to the city, and Gehazi has to think of something really quick, and he says, we'll just unload it here, guys. We'll just put it right here, and I'll handle it from this point. And so they unload it and stash it, and then he sends the servants away, and then he goes in and stands once more, as though nothing has happened, in front of Elisha. However, now Elisha asks him a question. Where have you been, Gehazi? Another deception. The insatiable appetite of covetousness both can't be satisfied and usually causes you or leads you into deception. Now another lie. So I haven't been anywhere. And then, sadly, Elisha responds, really, my heart went out. It's almost like saying my heart dropped. My heart dropped when I saw Naaman get off of his chariot and come and meet you. My heart dropped. The text we started with today, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Covetousness not only causes us to be deceitful, but we also we're blind to the recognition that God sees all. We somehow forget that God sees all. And Gehazi forgot it, was blind to it. You can't hide it from God. And so the answer came from Gehazi. It's not the time for money or to receive clothing. And he even reveals to Gehazi what he intended to do with the money. Olive groves, vineyards, sheep, oxen, male and female servants. It wasn't for any college kids going back to school. It was for oxen and sheep, olive groves, and the like. As I close here, there's some comparisons that I'd like to make, some contrasts. This is a story, at least the story of 2 miracles, and each miracle has to do with leprosy. Okay? While both miracles deal with leprosy, they do so in a contrasting way. The first miracle brought the removal of leprosy. The second brought the infliction of leprosy. Naaman left white, leprous. The first miracle was one of grace, and the second was one of judgment. The first miracle was one on a Gentile, the second on a Hebrew. And you would have thought the Gentile would have been lost and the Hebrew would have been saved. But it's just the opposite. The first miracle involved a man of eminence, Naaman, the captain of the Syrian army, The second involved a servant, Gehazi. The first miracle was announced by Elisha through a servant to the recipient. The second was announced by Elisha personally to the recipient. The first miracle occurred in public before a number of people, particularly Naaman's retinue. But the second occurred in private before only Gehazi and Elisha. Though a contrast to each other, these two miracles are inseparably connected. The first miracle is a sequel, or the second miracle is a sequel to the first. That's the first thing. The second thing that I got from this study was, like so many of the Old Testament stories and characters, they were prophetic in nature. They're what Doug Batchelor calls historical. They're an oracle, which is like a prophecy, something that only God can reveal that has to do with the future that we wouldn't know about otherwise. Something about this story has an omen, something to do with the future. And so I can think of a story similar to this one of Naaman and Elisha and Gehazi in the New Testament. Jesus' role is both prophet, priest, and king, right? He's both a prophet, he's a priest, and he's a king. In his prophetic role, you can see Old Testament examples of that in, like, Moses. Moses, a prophet, was a lawgiver. Jesus, as a prophet, was a lawgiver. Joseph, like Jesus, was turned against by his family, by his brethren, and sold off into slavery, sold to be killed, just like Jesus was sold, by his own people. Elijah is the prophet calling people to decision. Jesus was a prophet calling people to decision. One of the roles of a prophet is that of a teacher and miracle worker. Prophets brought healing and teaching into Israel, to the people of God. And Jesus' role as a teacher and healer is his prophetic role. Jesus was the prophet. Judas Iscariot was the servant. And Mary, the one that brought the spikenard and poured it on him, was the leper who had been healed by Jesus. And Mary, the leper, so thankful, so grateful, like Naaman, poured her gift upon Jesus. But the covetous Judas looked at it and he says, Then Judas Iscariot, the disciple who would soon betray him, said the perfume was worth a year's wage. It should have been sold and the money given to the poor. Not that he cared for the poor. He was a thief. And since he was in charge of the disciples' money, he often stole some for himself. So the story of Naaman and Gehazi and Elisha is the story of Jesus before it ever happened. And it's a lesson for us. And therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. And he went out from his presence leprous, as white as snow. The account of Gehazi's life is a tragic story. Only the Lord knows what the history of Gehazi might have been if he had not allowed covetousness to rule his soul. May God help us to profit by his failure. May we, through this well-illustrated warning, see the great curse of covetousness and avoid it like the plague. Okay? Father in heaven, to be like Jesus is our wish. We've sung the sentiments of our hearts just now. Thank you that we can look to you for the healing of our leprosy, our sin. Search our hearts and see if there is any secret or covetous thing in us, and cleanse it from us, we pray. Now we leave your house of worship, but not your presence. We ask your Spirit to be with us and live in our hearts and in our lives, and reflect you to those we come and meet this coming week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.